Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to La Hora Sostenible podcast. I'm John Izquierdo, your host and a proud member of the Duwamish Valley Sustainability Association, DVSA. Today's podcast is part of our South Park Community Engagement Methodology project, where we aim to help communities and government agencies work together to solve local problems by prioritizing community voices. We've tested this approach right here in South Park, thanks to amazing community support. Before we get started, I really want to thank our friends and partners, the awesome teams at DVSA, Amigos de Seattle, the Washington Department of Health, Seattle's Office of Sustainability and Environment, and Seattle Neighborhoods. Without your incredible support and teamwork, none of this podcast, and the whole South Park Community Engagement Project would be possible. Thank you for helping us and push forward together. At DVSA, we're focused on making sure the needs and priorities of communities dealing with racial and health inequalities are heard clearly by city leaders. Right now, we have some really exciting projects going on, like renewable energy with a biodigester, community-led environmental education, and this community engagement methodology to empower local residents. These projects are mainly helping families and vulnerable groups right here from South Park, tackling health, environmental, and economic challenges. And today we're lucky to have Anjilee Dodge with us, who's not only the program manager of the Duwamish Valley program, but also a Southport resident herself. It's great to have you here, Anjilee.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Could we start telling? Could you start by telling us a bit about your background and some of the cool projects you've been involved with, even beyond South Park?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career in social services. I'm a social worker by training. So I have my master's in social work from the University of Washington. And so I really take a structural and social justice stance when looking at planning projects. Before I came to the city, I was working for King County's Department of Local Services and leading up an economic alliance program that worked to address the disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 economically on our unincorporated areas. So those were looking at areas in like White Center and Skyway, the unincorporated areas in South Park, Boulevard Park, and the Sliver, as well as other more rural areas like Vashon Island and Northeast Snoqualmie Valley. So I had the privilege of working in community in all those areas to bring us together and really unite around shared priorities. So in coming to the position at the city with the Duwamish Valley program, I was really thrilled to see the amazing work. I'd been following the projects that have been happening in the Duwamish Valley for a long time as a resident of South Park. And it was really heartening to come to the city and see all the incredible work that's happening behind the scenes across departments to really uplift and trust the voices of our frontline community members in the Duwamish Valley who are seeing disproportionate impacts from climate change. So I'm really thrilled to be on this project and to be working with folks like yourself at the Duwamish Valley Sustainability Association.
Thank you. We've been working with in a lot of projects too, and we found some barrier that we're trying to tackle with this methodology. Here in DVSA, we noticed that a lot of groups and community-based organizations didn't really have a clear process to deal with community issues. That's why we decided to create a structured way to help communities talk directly to government agencies and make sure their voices are heard in policymaking. We used the Duwamish Valley Action Plan, the DVAP, which you worked on, Anjali, as our framework so that community could choose their most urgent needs. So I would like to ask a question. How important do you think it is for the communities to have clear methods like this to talk to decision makers?
Oh, it's so important. These pathways and pathways that community voices can be uplifted through are so critical to being able to attack issues systemically. Oftentimes, I think that, and historically, things have happened in silos, right, where community members are frustrated, they're seeing challenges, and they're looking for ways to connect with government and leaders in our communities to make effective change. And so these community meetings and engagement strategies that are being used in the Duwamish Valley have been incredibly effective. perspective. And I think one of the most impactful engagement opportunities that we've really seen work really well in not only delivering great programs and great projects is the youth work that's happening both at
Mm.
DVSA and with other partners like DRCC across the Duwamish Valley. And their work is really not only empowering these young people to enter into green careers and to understand the environmental issues that are that they're being impacted by, but also really have a clear opportunity to share their voice and share their ideas on what they want to see in the future. So we have several projects across the city that are tapping into that great knowledge with youth in our community to provide design suggestions for several of the infrastructure projects that are happening in the Duwamish Valley. So this has been awesome to hear these young people voice what they want to see when they walk the Duwamish Valley with their kids 20 years from now. And so that's the work that's really inspiring for me when it can have multiple benefits, when we not only have a beautiful infrastructure project that's happening in South Park and Georgetown, but also the community members have a clear voice and pathway to share what they want to see and to really take part in that planning process, not just a one-touch we're coming in and we're talking to them and extracting information, but having this two-way dialogue where we can really talk about challenges together and chew on issues that we're all grappling with. And these solutions that come creatively from community are sometimes some of the best that we are able to then take up into our planning and design processes and move forward with. So it's imperative that we have these pathways to communication with community up through local government and to our leaders.
And do they have like a structure, structured gathering of community opinions? Do you have like a methodology that they use in their
Yeah,
projects?
yeah. So kind of historically and traditionally what happens is by project, those project leaders or project managers. So let's just take a sidewalk project. Those leaders at SDOT who are working on that project would come in community and kind of say, okay, here's what we're looking at. And they traditionally do a community engagement session to get the opinions and feedback and just kind of talk with community. Kind of historically, what that has looked like is kind of a touch in and touch out, right? Like I said, they're having
Mhm.
one meeting or two or three or a series. And then that's kind of it. And different projects are a little disjointed, right? Not necessarily the parks projects are talking to the sidewalks projects. And so that's kind of the impetus of the Duwamish Valley program and the action plan is really to unite across departments at the city to be able to have a united voice on what needs to happen collectively at that community level. So it really gives an opportunity for city departments to talk to one another and to share, what one project is doing that might be able to link to or provide additional multi-benefit solutions for
Mhm.
other projects. And so that's really what the Duwamish Valley program does is that we are kind of a weaver. We weave ideas from community into city projects across departments. We are in the process right now of talking about how we improve that. Always we're under a state of iteration to figure out what's the best way to come into community and really learn from the great knowledge that's there and then implement those solutions at the structural level within city projects and programs. So what you all are doing to pull community together, we want to lean on what's already happening too and the great leadership that our community partners are driving forward. So we're so grateful when our community partners are able to bring the public and residents and community members together to share their voices and their needs and their concerns so that we can really address those and create solutions that work for everyone.
Yeah, that's amazing. Our main objective is to bring people together to gather their opinions and take them to the higher level, and that's why we're use this approach. These are the steps for the methodology. First, we identify everyone who should be involved, what we usually recognize as stakeholders, and next we find out what the community cares about most. Then we prioritize these issues together. And after that, we clearly define the problems and analyze them with community assets in mind. Then we brainstorm possible solutions, set clear criteria for evaluation, carefully review these solutions, and finally, we make decisions together as a community. Anjilee, what tips or strategies do you have to make sure everyone feels included in each step? You've worked in a lot of projects, so I believe you might have an idea.
Yeah, what I've been so impressed with DVSA is the ability to bring primarily Spanish speakers together and hold meetings in Spanish with, potential English translation. That's been something that I haven't seen as much across when city does organizing. There's usually it's in English primarily, and there's different languages available for translation or interpretation, which works great often. But uh, to have it be truly accessible, that's culturally accessible as well. And I think that what DVSA is doing to bring that in language support resources and community gathering space is so incredible to create that accessibility. And I think we need to be doing more of that in additional languages so that folks feel comfortable within their own communities to talk about some of these really complex and challenging issues that our city is facing and the nation is facing, right? And so I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to come as community. And I think the more ways that we make it accessible, the better our projects are going to make collective impacts, right? So I would love to see us continuing to do that in language engagement, as well as providing additional opportunities kind of coming into community. I think sometimes historically it has looked like the community needing to come to a government-led engagement session in order to get their voices out there and to have their opinions heard. And so we're talking about different ways to engage at community events so that we can get the voices of community where they're already at and not having to request them to come into our spaces. And so, and I think that's been a really huge success of the community engagement that we've done, not just with DVSA, but with other partners like Cultivate South Park and DRCC and DIRCOR and things, is that they're really embedded into these communities within the Duwamish Valley, and they are part of the community. And so when you have that trust and safety, you get creativity and you get innovative solutions. And I think that that's what we're leaning into, is really trusting the voices that we're hearing and providing those accessible opportunities within existing community events like Sopa Supa or the Duwamish River Days Festival or the Environmental Justice Forum that DRCC hosts, places where community is already at. How can we go there and really make the information that we're hoping to either share or get from community in regards to feedback, so that it feels easy, it feels accessible, and that they feel like their voices, they trust us enough to share their true ideas and true opinions. So the more we can make these opportunities to engage accessible in the preferred language of the community, and meeting them where they're at rather than kind of forcing folks to engage on our terms, I think is the way to move forward. Yeah.
Okay, right now we would like to talk about the importance of the methodology in addressing structural issues. Next slide, please. Well, I wanted to mention that through community voting, our community, South Park community, decided to focus on improving public transportation and economic opportunities, two huge structural issues affecting underserved communities historically. We believe it's critical to bring community ideas and priorities directly into policymaking to create lasting change. Anjilee, do you think the community has the power to address these structural issues, or is it a matter of policymaker? Is it both? This question can sound a little bit obvious, but some of our community members mentioned that they felt helpless when it comes to making a change in policy, and some of them have even quit that idea of trying to make a change. So, are they really like empowered to address these structural issues?
I have to believe yes, and that's kind of what I stand on, especially as a social worker, is that there's power in community and there's power in our voices, and if we're working together really around shared values, equity and of social justice and of environmental justice, then the more of us coming together around these shared priorities and values, the better we're going to have in terms of policies and solutions at that systemic level. And I think that it happens in spaces like this, where policymakers are in the room with community discussing these challenges that are happening really on the ground. And yeah, I think that it's hard not to feel hopeless, especially given the current political climate we're seeing ourselves in nationally. I think that things can feel challenging, and I'm sure throughout history they've always felt challenging, and we've also come a far way. Even if there's steps backwards, there's still steps forward. So I have to hold on to that hope that if we come together, we can create change, especially locally. That's something I've been really motivated and encouraged by is, the Duwamish Valley program is a place-based program, meaning that we really get the opportunity to focus in locally here just with the communities of South Park and Georgetown. South Park is only 1 square mile. So we have a great opportunity to come together and unite around those shared goals that we have across our differences and make huge impacts. I believe that 100%. And I believe because we have policymakers and leaders who are open to hearing those voices and implementing those creative solutions that community comes up with into policies and programming and future solutions. I think those are the opportunities that we have to lean into. And Seattle voters have been incredible in voting for more progressive policies in terms of the transportation levy that just got passed. That's going to pump, a good amount of money into our communities to solve some of the infrastructure issues that they're facing. So I do feel encouraged, and I feel encouraged that, we are in a city that cares for all residents, and that the policies and programs that are put into place, including the Duwamish Valley program, they're working to really meet the needs of those disproportionately impacted by climate change, by pandemics, by environmental injustices, by, the list goes on and on. So, I'm encouraged by that. And I'm encouraged by my colleagues at the city and how brilliant they are and how they're really working on the ground to solve these complex issues alongside community, and really wanting to make that a priority is something I feel really proud to be working in a program and in a government that supports the rights of our community members, and really sees that the most vulnerable among us are those who we should be designing solutions for, so that everyone can thrive, not only here in Seattle, but in King County and Washington State as well.
Yeah, I would say that there's a strong effort to make good things with the program, with DVIP, and I believe we feel encouraged too. We believe that we can start making small changes so people from the community can get encouraged to work harder and make big impact, big changes. So that's what we're trying to do. I know that the DVIP has very clear goals, and we believe a structured community engagement approach like ours could really help achieve them. Do you think that methodologies like ours could support reaching the DVIP goals effectively? And are there any other proposals or methods that are currently being used to make the DVIP even more successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. Community engagement has been one of the foundations of the Duwamish Valley program and the action plan. And so something with the action plan is that folks who worked to write it, which was back in 2016, really worked to take the feedback from many years prior to that, that was in community through surveys and engagement sessions, and say, okay, let's collectively look at this and holistically look at the actions that could come out of this feedback and this engagement that we learned from. So that was what led and what drove the actions and priorities that are in the Duwamish Valley Action Plan. So that continues to be something that underpins everything we do. Our youth, specifically our youth development programming, which partners with DVSA and DRCC, among many other organizations in the Duwamish Valley, really infuses the environmental justice programming and these ideas of climate justice and coming up with solutions with the young folks who are going to bear the brunt of this of climate change and of the environmental impacts that it's going to have into the future. And so that focus on young people is something that we want to continue doing, and also that we think is essential, not only again in the short term and really getting that feedback and but also in the long term to inspire future leaders and climate scientists and empower these community members and young people to really learn more about their environment and create solutions into the future. So that's something that we are continuing to develop out. Like, how do we grow that? How do we tap in even more? And how do we really continue engaging with community, like through the community engagement methodology, so that we're on the right track. And I think it's a great check and balance, right? And I think it needs to be an ongoing conversation. And that's something with the community engagement methodology that is powerful, is that it's just not one conversation, it's several over time, and that the youth have been brought into these conversations as part of the curriculum, right? So they can see how civic engagement and how being part of these conversations can impact projects into the future. It can impact the physical infrastructure of our community. So I hope that they don't just feel like it's a participating in something, they feel like they're really a part of something bigger than themselves. And I hope that with the Duomo Valley program, we can continue to have those deep and honest relationships with community, so that we can develop that trust, so that we can really create awesome work together and move towards solutions that, again, that meet the needs of our most vulnerable residents, and make it so that the Duomo Valley is a great place to live for everyone.
Thank you. I believe we're on the right track too. There's always room for improvement. We've learned a lot about the community, what they want, what they do not want. So it's all we've learned a lot, and I think the main goal is so that they can feel empowered, and the youth themselves can participate and make, feel that they're making a direct impact. I believe that's important.
Me too. Yeah, absolutely. It's important to feel things in the short term and not just in the long term. We can't say, oh yes, there's going to be a great park here in 20 years. We want to be able to offer them great opportunities now, to feel like their voices are being heard now, and that their solutions are being implemented in short term and long term ways.
But still, I think we need to get a balance, because sometimes they feel frustrated because they don't. They know that sometimes they can get like a response and answer from the city, but then there are some structural problems that can't be solved uh, in that have to be solved in long-term
Yeah.
programs. So yeah,
Yep.
we have to work a lot to have this, as you mentioned, several conversations, and try to keep this dynamic with the government and the community.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to see things holistically as well.
Yes.
And that's something that has been super inspiring in working with the young people of the Duwamish Valley, is seeing how they see the big picture. And they're not just looking at what's happening and what's right in front of their face, is that they're really engaged with what the vision for that future and that long term looks like. And that's that structural change that you talked about, right? And you're right that that's not quick. When we're talking about undoing historic structural inequalities, it's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot to untangle knots that have been really ingrained over history and long periods of time. So I think leaning into that can give us a little bit of breathing room. When you were talking about not feeling hopeful, I think breathing into, like, this is a big knot that we all have responsibility to untangle. So what's your small part, and where can we just create some breathing room to say it's going to take a minute? And that's something that we have to lean into that process and figuring out, again, let's balance the short-term and the long-term solutions. So that's what keeps me excited, is really honoring that, this is a long game. And that's okay.
We
And
know that,
we got to
yes.
prepare for the marathon. Exactly. And there's ways that we can do that. I think that coming together as community, is something more than just that civic engagement, right? It's really trusting each other as people and coming in as friends. And the youth programming in the Duwamish Valley is so powerful because it's creating that human community, and that's part of resilience building. So we need that just as much as we need, great sidewalks and awesome bridges and beautiful parks. So yeah, all of it is important. And I think that there's hope in continuing to know that this is the long game and it's a marathon, not a sprint. And we're going to, see it as that.
Yeah, sometimes not even a marathon, maybe a triathlon, but we're still working on it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, right now, I would like to talk about your personal experience in South Park. As a South Park resident yourself, could you share a little bit about your personal experience living there? Have you noticed any significant positive or negative changes over the years?
Yeah, yeah. I've been a resident in South Park since 2012, and my family has been residents of the South King County since my mom was a teenager, and so there's been a lot of change in that time. Um, when I moved in 2012, the South Park Bridge on 14th was not open. It was closed, and most of the businesses on 14th had also closed down with it. That was a long fought community um, advocacy to get that bridge
Mhm.
restored and back in. And so to see, the increased foot traffic and car traffic because of the bridge, that has positively and negatively impacted the community in terms of pollution, right? More cars coming through, but also the businesses now are seeing more patrons for lunch and for dinner. More businesses have opened up. There's a more diverse array of restaurants and businesses in the South Park Business District. And our partners at Cultivate South Park are doing an incredible job of really uplifting those small businesses. And that's another priority of the Duwamish Valley program. And so it's been cool as a resident to see those changes. We were really excited just to get one coffee shop in South Park. Back in 2013 or 14. And so to see the multiple restaurants and businesses that are working towards thriving, they still struggle, and we are actively trying to work on how we can look at business district attraction efforts to make sure that there's the foot traffic and the customers that can really sustain these businesses and keep them afloat. But there's also been some great park improvements. So actually soon the South Park Plaza, which used to be the loading site and the laydown site for the construction of the bridge. And so, this is a long time in the making to say, okay, after we use this for construction purposes, then we're going to repurpose that space into a park. And, during that talks of, okay, what does this park look like? Community said, no, we also need housing. Please prioritize housing. And so what came from those discussions of the plaza was the housing site. So there's an Office of Housing site that's going to be installing affordable housing on 14th, which has been a long ask of this community, is affordable housing. And then also there's another park site just up the road that is going to be developed out in the coming years. And so there's a lot of exciting projects that are coming, and that's because of the advocacy of community and the Duwamish Valley program really pushing those desires within the city with our different departments. And so we've had great successes. The community center is also under construction right now, which is going to add a beautiful turf field for soccer and for after school programming. So we're really excited about the community center and the construction there. We're going to get a lot more amenities that South Park deserves, that the Duwamish Valley deserves, and these residents have been asking for a long time. Mar Farm is another spot that's really close to me. That's walking distance. I walk there with my son. He's grown up looking at the chickens there and walking through Salsa de la Vida's farm plot and Young One Empowered's farm plot, and talking to the girls and the young people who are getting education services there. So it's been great to see the improvements of that park as well. So they added in drainage and some wheelchair accessible pathways so that now you can take a nice walk and your feet aren't getting covered in mud because it's just a muddy field, which it was before. Now there's a beautiful parking lot and it's an accessible space for everyone to utilize, and people do. So it's awesome. I get to walk my dog there in the morning, and that wasn't a space that you could do that in prior to the work of the DVP and the work of parks to really look at these community spaces and figure out how we can make them more usable and make them more beautiful and make them more accessible. So I've been thrilled to see some of the amenities that have come into South Park in the last, 10 to 20 years. And I was proud to be a South Park resident before the bridge came in, and I'm still really proud to be part of this community. It's a super tight-knit community. The neighbors really care for each other. Literally, we're going to our neighbors for cups of sugar and eggs and, dog pet care and all the things. It's a really beautiful place. There's sharing sheds. There's a food and these are all mutual aid efforts from community by community to make sure that we're taking care of each other. And so, that's another beautiful thing about South Park is that it feels like there is community here, and that we all want to see the best for each other and the best for the Duwamish Valley. So yeah, I'm proud to live here, and there's been a lot of shifts, and I think shifts towards the better. I think that there's challenges that come with those changes. And I think that we're going to have to grow with the new structures that are coming in. For example, on my street, there's a Habitat for Humanity housing site. So there's going to be over 30 homes that are built in our square block. And so, what are the infrastructure impacts of that? How will the many families that are coming into the community shift our needs in terms of sidewalks and public or pedestrian safety? And so, our partners at SDOT and Parks and Office of Housing are all working together to figure out how we plan for and accommodate the families that are going to join our community once these housing projects are completed. So like I said, I think it's all really exciting that we're getting these beautiful amenities and that we're offering more affordable housing to our community members who deserve it. And we're going to, there might be some growing pains with that, and we're going to need to adjust certain things as the infrastructure in the community changes. But overall, it's been beautiful to see South Park come alive with, the bridge opening and the business district really finding its feet, its foundation, and growing with the help of our community partners and the nonprofits who are working to really cultivate the beauty here. So yeah, it's been great to see the changes over time, and I'm really proud to continue being part of this community.
Yeah, and maybe living in as you say, a tight-knit community shape your professional commitment to community work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I like I said, I was at the county and working in surrounding unincorporated areas prior to coming to this project with the Duwamish Valley program. And I was just the thought of being able to commit my professional self to bettering my personal community and making this a beautiful home for everyone who lives here is there's a lot of purpose in that. And I feel really honored that I get to share with that responsibility with everyone here and with the community members who has historically fought for amenities and for infrastructure improvements. Specifically, DRCC is fighting for the bridge, the South Park Bridge, which we know is important to connect residents of South Park to other areas of the city. So, those types of advocacy efforts, I feel honored that I get to now be on the other side in a government role to work out those policy solutions and figure out how we tackle these complex issues that, we're all grappling with across the city and within the nation. So, I feel honored to be part of the community and also be able to play a role in designing solutions with everyone here.
Thank you, Anjilee, for sharing these experiences with us. Now we would like to talk a little bit more about the challenges in implementing the DVAP in South Park. We know that you've worked closely in the DVAP. Um, could you talk a little bit about the biggest challenges you faced and the best ways you found to overcome them?
That's a great question. I'll say I only have been with the Duwamish Valley program since September, so about 6 months now, which has been an incredible time to learn about all the complex work that's happening in
Mhm.
the Duwamish Valley. The Duwamish Valley has a unique set of complex issues. We know that the Duwamish River is a Superfund site, and so actively, everyone from the port to the city to the county to businesses and residents are having to cope with this pollution that has come from the river, and so and from historic industry in the area that aren't, many of them aren't even there now, and we're still
Mm.
facing the impacts of that. And so those are big challenges that not one person can solve. And I think that the other unique challenges is just that there's many different jurisdictions that cross South Park. So we have Highway 99 and 509 that run kind of through South Park, or create kind of the border of South Park. And those are, WashDOT is the entity that has jurisdiction over those. And then of course county and port are also key interest holders in the area, as well as the city, and of course private property owners. And so because of that just adds to the complication, right? It's not one jurisdiction that can make collective decisions about this geographic area. It's multiple. And so that's why the Duwamish Valley program is really there to be that connector, and to not only connect city departments to the work that's happening in the Duwamish Valley, but also our external partners, to make sure everyone is working together to identify those shared goals and those shared values, and work towards finding solutions for those complex problems that we're facing. So yeah, I think that's hard work. And going back to our conversation about it's the long game, right? We have to think far into the future to strategize around solutions to some big, complex, systemic problems that collectively we're facing. So those are challenges. And kind of going back to that hope, I'm really excited about the work of the action plan, because it really does outline for us a template for how to move forward, and some of those action items that we can be tackling to create that systemic change. And that involves all of our partners. So yeah, I feel, again, privileged to be in a position where we get to work with everyone to really figure out how to make the Duwamish Valley thrive in the best way it can, both now and into the future.
Yeah, we know that there are some barriers. There are multiple jurisdictions that sometimes don't communicate with each other, and that's a problem. Now that we're working in mobility and transportation, we found that we have to trying to connect very different agents so we can learn more and try to get to to get to a solution for these problems. For example, now that we're talking about mobility, I would like to say that our community said that their biggest transportation concerns are safety and reliability. They mentioned unsafe routes to bus stops, poor lighting, and concerns around people experiencing mental health crisis or substance abuse in the public transport, creating unsafe environments. Anjilee, do you see the same issues, and how would you suggest addressing these challenges in mobility and transportation?
Yeah. Um, I absolutely see these issues, and I don't think they're just challenges that South Park or Seattle is facing. These are national challenges that we're facing, and I would even say global challenges. Um, and there's unfortunately not a quick fix a lot of the time, especially when we're talking about mental health, substance abuse. Like I mentioned, I come from a career in social services. I've spent 13 years in the nonprofit sector working with unstably housed and homeless individuals. And what I come to know from that is that, again, that's another long game. That's another way that we need to commit to working into the future to support communities who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, to the impacts of economic disturbances like the pandemic, who are vulnerable to unstable, you know, business. They might need support in finding jobs. They might need support in finding housing. And so we all have to work together. It's a multi-sector response model that we need to deploy to really say everyone has a role in tackling these large issues, and not one person can bear the burden of solving these systemic issues that are there because of injustices throughout history. And so, yeah, coming together, especially when we're talking about the mobility challenges of South Park. There's some, I think the infrastructure solutions are, in my perspective, those are achievable, right? There's been a great transportation levy that was just passed by Seattle voters, and that's going to bring some resources into our community to really solve some of the infrastructure challenges that make it hard to get to bus stops or make it feel unsafe, or the lighting issues. Those are issues that have solutions, and I think that the human issues that we see in terms of drug addiction, in terms of homelessness, in terms of mental health crises that folks are going through, I think that we have to deploy compassion and empathy and work with each other to talk about what needs to happen to really create changes there. And of course, that's working within government structures and the resources that the city can offer. But I think that those are longer issues that really require a humanistic approach. And of course, bringing in more resources in terms of programming to the Duwamish Valley. And so, one of the projects we're really looking at is a mapping project that's looking to map all of the projects and programs that are available to residents and businesses in the Duwamish Valley. And so this will look like a map that you can look at the sidewalk improvement projects and the drainage improvement projects that are happening across the Duwamish Valley, but then also look at the programs that are available for mental health support, for substance use, for youth programming, for small business development. And so we want to make sure that we can provide accessible points of entry for everyone. And so we're looking at more opportunities to engage in person during drop-in hours. What does it look like to have, a hub for that social service engagement? So that's some of the exciting challenges that we can create creative solutions for, especially if we're all working together around tackling these hard, systemic, really ingrained issues that you mentioned.
Yes, and it is complex. We know it's even controversial sometimes, but I believe that at least the success of our methodology is measured with the time and number of conversations that the community can have with the agencies and the government. So I believe that's a win.
Yeah,
Even if we don't get to solve the problem immediately, that's a win. That's what we believe.
I believe so too. And because like you mentioned, that is creating community, and belonging is one of the biggest factors that we can deploy without anything, without money, without funding, without a program. Belonging and coming together in community is a protective factor that prevents against mental health impacts. It prevents against folks turning to substances because they feel alone. It prevents against, houselessness as well. When family comes together and says, "Oh, I got a couch, I got a bed. Don't go there." So, I think that there are some solutions that we can look to that are totally accessible in there. And like you said, this community engagement methodology and just groups of community and people and residents and businesses and nonprofits and the government coming together to talk about it is how we can be successful.
Yeah, Anjilee, I totally agree with you. Before we run out of time, I would like to talk a little bit about innovative solutions and community participations. Um, I was wondering if you could share maybe a successful community participation, one successful community participation that could be used an interesting example of resilience to South Park. We know that you have a lot of experience as a social worker.
Yeah, I think I'll just use the most recent example, which was actually coming from the community engagement methodology with DVSA. I attended a number of community meetings as part of this process, and um, I got I was in a tour with SDOT about the sidewalks. And so the transportation levy is actually funding a fair amount of sidewalk installations in Seattle. And South Park's one of the communities that they're prioritizing as part of this levy process. And so I happened to be on a tour with one of the SDOT planners who are really leading up the sidewalk work, and had mentioned that in the community engagement methodology meeting, they had community members were looking at maps and actually highlighting roads and different places that needed greater accessibility, meaning sidewalks, lighting, and potential shuttle stops. And so I was able to share the maps that were created in that meeting with the actual, the community had drawn where they want sidewalks with the planner who's leading up the sidewalk work with the levy. And so he was able to use that those initial just kind of check-ins with community to figure out, okay, where do we want these sidewalks? And so that's just the start of their engagement with SDOT in terms of what should happen. But because of this information that you're collecting in community, I was in my participation in that meeting, I was able to take that direct feedback and offer it to the planner, who's really going to use that to narrow down the scope of the work and where those sidewalks might be most effective. What I heard in that meeting was really looking at sidewalks in terms of access to schools. And so even on the one block that I have from Concord Elementary from my house, my son and his peers are having to walk to school on roads that don't have sidewalks. And so what that means is that they're walking in the middle of the road, right? And cars are having to kind of go around, and there's not as much accessibility or safety, right, without those sidewalks in place. So it was really cool to hear other community members echo where those sidewalks need to be, and then to be able to pass that on to the planners within SDOT was a great result that hopefully will result in the community getting their needs met, right? That's the whole goal. So I think that's a great example of how community engagement and really working in community with tangible asks can be really effective in structural planning and infrastructure planning. So that's one example. Did that get to your question?
Yeah, of course. Actually, that was a very powerful community event, and I cannot lie that the team was very excited to hear that you wanted to share the results. We actually felt empowered, you know. So I believe that's the whole goal, and thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it felt like great timing, and it was just an example of how it should work, right? How we should be having these conversations. And I think that that's just the start of the city's engagement with community. Really, there has been a focus on leaning into community networks and making sure we have a lot of engagement in terms of these transportation projects. So it was just a great example. And SDOT was also there in the room, right? So it gives us a platform and kind of a foundation for us to work from when we're looking at designing these infrastructure solutions.
One last question. What are the main obstacles to the effective community participation,
What are the main obstacles to effective community participation?
in your opinion?
I think, yeah, I think people are busy. I think that, a lot of us are in survival mode, especially those folks who
Yeah,
are
that's true.
furthest from power and furthest from equity, who are really struggling and most vulnerable to, to environmental stressors, whether that's again flooding or asthma with the pollution or from smoke from wildfires, right? Like those who have medical issues or disabilities, those who, speak a language that's not commonly, either interpreted within meetings or like the DVSA is like provided in that language, preferred
Hmm.
language. So I think that kind of the question you asked about accessibility is really relevant here when we're talking about obstacles. And I think that that's why designing low barrier solutions where it's really easy for people to get involved, and cutting out the red tape, I think that there's been great success with offering food. You all do a great job of really welcoming everyone into these conversations, with wide open arms and a snack. And I think that goes a long way. But I think that the barriers that are there for folks who are, working 3 jobs, who have kids
Yes.
and have activities, who, are already stressed, to add one more thing to the to-do list is challenging, right? So I think it's constantly, thinking creatively about how we meet people where they're at. How do we come into schools and workplaces, into shelters and food banks, into community events and activities, so that it doesn't feel like a chore, or it doesn't feel like it's an extra thing to get that,
Yes.
to provide your voice. It's something that's just built into everything we do, and that we're always listening, and we're always taking notes, and making those connections, for when we can pass up information. Yeah, I think that I would love to see these engagement sessions across the board, right? Really be something that feels innate, feels part of everything we're doing, rather than a special something that we do when we have to. And so, yeah, this work of really lowering those barriers and making, engagement sessions super accessible and frequent, regular, engagement, so that it's not a one touch and then we're done. It's we're having ongoing conversations. There's iterations. We're asking questions. We're getting more specific, right? If there was all these sidewalks that that community said they wanted in this engagement session, but we unfortunately only have funding for this many sidewalks, how can
Mm.
we come back and say, okay, we heard these sidewalks were priority. We can only do this many out of this many. So which ones do we actually want to focus on, right? So it's that iteration of work, coming back to it over and over, and continuing those conversations so that community feels empowered to give their feedback, right? I think that when community is asked over and over, for what they want and need, and they don't see that traction happening, it can feel discouraging. So making sure that on our end, we're, offering opportunities for them to see the traction, to see where it's going, to see how their feedback was, folded into the project plan, and what the next steps are. So, yeah, I think kind of just to revisit, to make things accessible, is reducing those barriers. So maybe the hybrid meeting, those are always awesome, because I think folks can engage, on their phones while they're, on the bus getting home from work, or they can engage, in their ears and not say anything, but listen to what's going on, and then be able to offer feedback, at a later time. So, obviously the language accessibility is huge, and, Spanish speakers, and, having languages in the preferred, language of folks in communities. So Spanish is one, but I think we need many more: Vietnamese and Khmer and all these different languages that, are, that residents, find their home in South Park and Georgetown. We need to offer community meetings in language. So, we're working towards doing more of that. We always try to offer translations, but the more we can do to reduce those barriers, the better.
Yes, I believe that's a powerful insight. We have to focus on accessibility, um, and we need to have to keep those things in mind to be able to help people in a right way. And yeah, I haven't thought about some of the things you said, so it's interesting. Thank you
Mm.
for your all your insights.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Anjilee. Your
Yeah.
ideas were incredibly helpful, and your insights too. So, any final words for everyone listening?
I just want to thank you, John. This is a great conversation, and all the work that's happening in the Duwamish Valley by our community partners like DVSA. We're just so grateful that you all are on the ground and really have that touch and that trust of community to, make their voices heard, and find the proper and the right channels and pathways, so that everyone can feel like they can thrive within the Duwamish Valley. So thank you for your work and the work of your organization. And, I'm just excited to keep working together.
Thank you so much, Anjali.
Mhm.
Thank you again for joining us today, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Check out dvsa.webflop.io to learn more and get involved. See you next time.